I definitely have noticed in the last few years, at least, that there has been more awareness raised around plastic. But then I also see the other side where a lot of companies are focusing more on specifically the polyphenol, the PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. But then there's other chemicals that go in the plastic that are just as toxic as PCBs, that they say, well, it's PCB free, but then there's these other things in there. So on the one hand, it's like we are paying for the convenience of something like plastic. But on the other hand, I think we definitely are underestimating how toxic on so many levels, things like plastic and even like building materials, like you look around your room, the paint in the walls, the glue on the floors, the glue in your furniture. And we're just constantly exposed to that stuff.
Yeah. So the example is BPA. Most people know it. Yeah. But PCBs are also toxic.
Right.
But people go to the store and they'll see a plastic bottle, and on it will say it's BPA free, which, hey, that's great. It doesn't have any BPA. It won't say, oh, by the way, this has BPS, which chemically almost looks identical to BPA, is just as toxic, but it's BPA free. So what I try to tell people is just as much as possible, avoid plastics, because it's not just what the plastic is made out of, it's the accelerants they use in the manufacture process.
And it's pretty shocking, when you learn about how quickly something like those chemicals cross the blood-brain barrier, and the prevalence of these things in our world. And then you correlate that to the numbers of mental illness that you see, whether it's depression or even anxiety or ADHD. And, I don't think there's enough doctors, like someone like you who understands these, who understands the body's role in detoxing and how these chemicals do affect the brain, versus a doctor who will very quickly say, okay, well, what you have is depression or what you have is anxiety. Even more to the point, I think you have a lot of instances of people going to doctors and just flat out asking for these medications. And so there's just not enough education in this realm to begin with.
Right. And I think one of the other principles I try to communicate, it's the precautionary principle. It's like when you have a new chemical, just presume that it might be toxic before you release it to the general public. Unfortunately, that was not done with a lot of these plastics that we're running into, and then once these get inside of us, most of them, the ones that are fat soluble, are not going anywhere. They're collecting within our brain and other fatty tissues. They might have a half-life of 70 years. For all intents and purposes, they're not going anywhere. But the saddest part is, but guess where they are going? They're going to the next generation.
Yeah.
If you check umbilical board, and they did this study at Harvard, my alma mater, years ago. If you check umbilical blood from newborn babies, they found a couple hundred different of these chemicals in these new babies, and many of those chemicals are toxic. And then we also know that the rate of obesity of 6-month-old babies has exploded, and you can't blame little babies for not exercising.
Right. Well, they need to get to we could say they need to get to the gym a little bit. That's fine. We try not to be so politically correct here. No, you're right. That's frightening.